Today was the final straw. My parents dumped my brother's mess on me again, like they always do. As far as I'm concerned, they no longer exist in my life. Hello, everyone. This is going to be a long story. I don't know how much time I can dedicate to telling it all at once. Typing on a mobile screen strains my eyes, and reliving these memories takes a toll on me mentally. So, I'll be sharing it in separate parts at a pace that doesn't overwhelm me. I hope that doesn't bother anyone. I feel an overwhelming need to put this story out there, to get it off my chest, and finally leave it in the past. Maybe if I do, I can stop these memories from haunting me. I believe many of you will understand that need. I'm a 33-year-old man. You can call me. Let's go with Sam. It's a name I like, and I prefer to stay anonymous. The best place to start is where everything begins, childhood. I was born in 1991, into a poor family struggling to survive in a post-Soviet country. When I say poor, I mean the kind of poverty where food wasn't always guaranteed, electricity was a luxury, and heating in winter was a distant dream. My family consisted of my parents and a younger brother, B, who was 5 years younger than me. There wasn't much entertainment at home, so my brother and I spent a lot of time roughhousing, normal sibling stuff. Going outside to play wasn't an option. Our neighborhood was dangerous, the kind of place where kids weren't safe, and our parents made sure we stayed inside. Looking back now, I realized that isolation planted the early seeds of my social anxiety. It all makes sense in hindsight. So when the time finally came for me to start school, I was probably more excited than most kids. At least there, I could be around other people, feel like I belonged somewhere, even for a few hours. But my school life got off to a rocky start. I had too much energy, couldn't sit still, and always found myself getting into trouble. Teachers scolded me constantly. Despite that, I was one of the top students in my class, especially in math. For 5 straight years, from 1st to 5th grade, my name was featured on the school's board, where they showcased the best student from each class. Then, when I hit 11 years old, everything changed. My grades started to plummet, but that's a story for later. Because I was a high-achieving student, most teachers were willing to overlook my restlessness. But one particular incident shattered that illusion. I was about 9 years old when a teacher accused me of something I didn't do. Without hesitation, she yanked my ear so hard it felt like she wanted to tear it off. I was furious. I had accepted punishments when I actually misbehaved, but being punished for something I didn't do? That was unbearable. My anger burned as I stood up, walked straight out of the classroom, and went home to tell my parents what had happened. The moment my mother, M, heard my story, she turned to my father, F, and told him to handle it. He didn't hesitate. He promised me he would take care of it. When we arrived at the school, F walked into the classroom and confronted the teacher head-on. His voice was firm, unwavering. "Why did you lay a hand on my son? You had no right to touch him. If you did something wrong, you inform us. You don't hurt him." For the first time in my life, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. I wasn't alone. Someone had my back. Someone was willing to stand up for me when I was treated unfairly. It was a rare moment of validation, but that feeling didn't last. The teacher's eyes widened, then narrowed as she turned to face me. "I never touched him." "Did I? Why are you lying?" she snapped, her voice sharp with accusation. That was the first time I ever experienced gaslighting at such an intense level. My mouth opened to defend myself, but before I could get a word out, she pressed forward. "Did I? Class, did I touch him?" she demanded, her tone shifting into something aggressive and commanding. Silence. Not a single student dared to speak up. No one wanted to be the next target. The teacher turned to my father, her expression twisted with rage. "Maybe if you actually paid attention to your kid, you'd realize he's a liar and a constant headache for every teacher here," she spat. "Instead of storming in here with false accusations, maybe try raising him properly." She was seething, practically shaking with anger. I hadn't even managed to say a single word before I suddenly felt my father's hand clamp around the back of my neck. His grip was tight, painful. "Let's go," he muttered, dragging me out of the classroom without another word. The entire walk home, he didn't say a thing. I stayed silent too, drowning in shame. Shame that I hadn't been able to defend myself. Shame that no one had believed me. When we finally reached the stairwell of our apartment building, he stopped, turned to me, and drove his fist straight into my gut. The air was knocked out of my lungs instantly. I doubled over, gasping, feeling like he had hit me with every ounce of strength he had. Maybe he hadn't, but it sure felt that way. "Why didn't you say anything?" he snapped, his voice dripping with disgust. "I looked like a complete fool because of you." I tried to respond, but my body was still reeling from the blow. Before I could catch my breath, he kicked me hard from behind. "Move, you worthless piece of trash." I had no choice but to crawl up the stairs on all fours until my legs stopped shaking enough for me to stand. By then, any thoughts of defending myself had vanished. I had learned my lesson. That was the first time I can clearly remember my father beating me. But it wouldn't be the last. That memory is burned into my mind, as vivid as if it happened just yesterday. I need a break. My wrist is killing me, and that memory was heavier than I expected. I'll continue later. Yesterday, I said that was the first time my father hit me. Let me correct that. It's just the first time I can remember. I'm sure there were more, but my memory is full of gaps. I'll explain why later. After the incident with the teacher, my parents demanded that I be transferred to another class. The school director approved it without hesitation. But switching classes didn't fix anything, it just meant a new set of problems. This new class was prime hunting ground for bullies. Older kids, 3 grades above us, would barge in between lessons and shake down students for money. I almost never had any, which only made things worse. They assumed I was hiding something, so they'd rifle through my school bag when I wasn't looking, shove me when passing by, and mock me, calling me a beggar. I was reaching my limit, but I already knew asking my parents for help was pointless. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have. This was different. These weren't adults. These were just kids, bigger, meaner kids, sure, but still kids. And I wanted to handle it myself. So I started looking for allies. I found 4 of the biggest boys in my class and told them exactly how unfair it was that we kept getting robbed. They agreed. We made a plan. Next time the bullies showed up, we wouldn't just sit there and take it. We'd stand together. And if things escalated, we'd fight back. Everyone was on board. I went home that day with a rare feeling excitement. Tomorrow, things would finally change. The next day arrived. We were standing outside our classroom when the bullies showed up. They didn't say a word, just stretched out their hands, expecting money like it was their right. I smirked, feeling bold now that we had the numbers. What's wrong with you? Are you the beggar now? I said mockingly. The lead bully's eyes flicked to me, caught off guard. You trying to get yourself killed? He asked, his tone low and threatening. I let out a short laugh. Are you dumb? There are 6 of us. We'll tear you apart. He chuckled, unfazed. Who's a we? Confidently, I turned to gesture toward my classmates, only to find empty space where they had been. Just like that, they were gone, vanished without a trace. Before I could even process the betrayal, a sharp pain exploded in my stomach. The bully had kicked me hard, sending me crumpling to the ground. His friend followed up with a half-hearted kick, sneering, there's your we. For the second time in my life, I had been kicked in the gut, both physically and figuratively. Betrayed and humiliated, I swallowed my anger and pushed myself up, refusing to let them see me cry. I walked straight into the classroom, where those cowards were already standing as if nothing had happened. Rage boiled over. My voice shook as I demanded, why did you leave me? One of them, not even able to meet my eyes, muttered, sorry, we got scared. Scared. That was their excuse. Something inside me snapped. Well, from now on, you'll be scared of this. I spat before swinging my fist straight into his nose. Blood gushed instantly, staining his face, his shirt, his shock frozen in place. In my mind, it was as if the whole classroom was painted red, but that might have just been my imagination exaggerating the moment. The teacher walked in moments later, I scanning the room. Who did this? She asked. Silence. No one spoke, not even the kid I had just punched. When the final bell rang, I waited outside. I wasn't finished. You all betrayed me, I said coldly when they finally came out. That means you owe me. So from now on, you bring extra change for me, or you'll get what he got today. I pointed at the kid still wiping blood from his face. No one argued. No one objected. And sure enough, the next day, they started paying up. For the first time in my life, I had taken control. I had been powerless for too long, but this time, I didn't just take it, I fought back. And violence had worked. It was the first thing that ever had. That was when my grades started slipping. Slowly. Gradually. Almost unnoticed at first. I'll stop here for now. Also, I want to say thanks to everyone for your support. Your words mean more than you know. With money finally in my pocket, I no longer had to go hungry. And once you have money, your mind starts wondering, what else can I get with this? So, in my teenage logic, I thought I had a brilliant idea. I got a pack of cigarettes, skipped class after collecting my share, and headed off with a friend, let's call him Luis, L., to a nearby construction site. Luis had been one of the 4 traders that day, but something about him felt different. Unlike the others, he actually made the effort to come to my house, look me in the eye, and apologize. He didn't just mutter a half-hearted sorry and move on. He told me he felt awful about what he had done. And I believed him. No one else had shown an ounce of regret, so I decided that his apology was enough. His debt was cleared. But Luis didn't see it that way. He insisted he still owed me, so he started bringing me little things, some candy, a bottle of cola, small tokens he'd slipped to me during class. It didn't feel like guilt. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like actual care. Slowly, I started respecting him, and before I knew it, we became best friends. Around that time, things at home took a sharp turn for the worse. My father had started a new job, and with it came heavy drinking. I was about 12 years old, and as the drinking increased, so did the violence. The worse things got at home, the more I wanted to be anywhere but there. And Luis became my escape. We wandered aimlessly, wasting time, doing nothing, but even that was better than being at home. At some point, I realized I loved Luis like a brother more than my actual brother. My younger brother, B, was 5 years younger than me, practically a baby in my eyes. He was the fragile, whiny one, always running to our mother at the smallest scratch or bruise. And every time he cried, my parents never asked what happened. They just assumed it was my fault and started beating me. My father rarely handled discipline himself. That was my mother's job, and she loved it. She'd yank my hair so hard that it sometimes left my scalp sore, even pulling out strands. Her anger didn't stop at slaps. Her hits always landed on my head. Constant headaches became part of my daily life. Maybe that was another reason my grades started slipping. Every time I got beaten for something my brother did, I resented him more. Every time I saw Luis, I felt safer. Little by little, I stopped seeing my blood brother as family and started seeing Luis as my real brother. So naturally, when I bought my first pack of cigarettes, the first person I told was Luis. We snuck off to a construction site to smoke. And yeah, we definitely overdid it. Luis had a few, but I went all in. Let's just say I learned my lesson the hard way. For the first time in my life, the stress, the headaches, the constant, gnawing anger, it all disappeared. I felt calm. I liked it. So I kept doing it. At the same time, my grip on the levies I had been collecting from my former friends started to loosen. I stopped demanding as much. And, strangely, I started feeling sorry for them. I'd noticed their torn clothes, their worn-out shoes, and instead of anger, I felt something else, pity. Sometimes, I'd even spend my money on them, buying sweets or cola. They started hanging around me more, treating me like someone important, asking me things like I had all the answers. For the first time in my life, I felt respected. And that was a powerful feeling. But now, I had a bigger target in mind. The older bullies. The ones who had tormented me and my classmates for so long. The ones who had made our lives miserable, who had started this entire chain reaction of fear, betrayal, and violence. I realized something: if it weren't for them, my so-called friends wouldn't have turned on me. I wouldn't have become the person who made them pay their debt. Everything traced back to those older kids. And I had a lot of rage that needed an outlet. This time, I wasn't alone. This time, my friends had my back. Something strange has been happening since I started writing this memoir. I feel calmer. And memories I had buried deep, are starting to surface. The first one hit me like a flashback from a movie. I was 6 years old. We didn't have much food. That night, we sat at the table, each of us with a plate holding a single spoonful of potato puree. I hadn't eaten all day, so my father and I cleared our plates in seconds. Then my mother turned to me. "If you want more, you can have mine," she said. I knew the truth. There was no more. There was never any more. But still, I shook my head. "No, I'm full," I told her. She insisted. "I ate at your grandparents' today, so I'm not hungry. Can you finish my plate too?" My mother often took my brother and me to visit her parents, our grandparents. It wasn't a warm family gathering. They fed us not out of kindness, but because my mother had made my father's failure their problem. It was an unspoken agreement, a parasitic relationship that always made me feel ashamed. But when you're hungry, shame doesn't matter much. Sometimes, the humiliation was too much for me to bear, and I'd choose to stay home. But by evening, when hunger gnawed at my stomach, I always regretted it. That particular day, I had refused to go. My mother came back carrying a few potatoes she had taken from my grandparents' house. Even when she offered me some, I refused. But she didn't let it go. "Please, if you don't need it, I'll have to throw it away," she said, carrying the plate toward the trash can as if she was about to dump it. Whoa, don't waste perfectly good food. "I'll eat it," I said quickly. She set the plate down in front of me, kissed me on the head, and smiled. "Eat up." "Thank you," or else I would have had to throw it away. The entire time, my father sat in front of the TV, silent, detached, completely uninvolved. He hadn't said a single word. But the second my mother left the room, he turned to me. I had barely taken my first bite when his voice cut through the silence. Low, angry, teeth clenched. Your mother was hungry, and you took her food. You're shameless. You're not a man. Then he spat on me. I froze. My throat closed up, making it impossible to swallow. The food in my mouth suddenly felt like it was suffocating me, so I spat it back onto the plate. Without a word, I got up and went to my room. I buried my face in my pillow and let the tears come. I wasn't just crying because of what my father had said. I cried because I pitied my mother. I cried because I hated myself for being impatient, for taking food that she might have needed more than me. And most of all, I cried because it was my father's failure that had put us in this situation in the first place. Then my eyes landed on my little brother. Just 3 years old, peacefully sleeping in the next bed, safe, comfortable, without a care in the world. And in that moment, I couldn't help but feel resentment. And then, I hated myself even more for thinking that. Later that night, half asleep, I got up to use the toilet. As I passed the kitchen, I saw my mother sitting at the table, quietly eating the potato puree I had left behind. I don't remember what I felt in that moment. Maybe nothing. Maybe I was too drained to feel anything at all. It's just a flash, a single frozen frame burned into my mind. Writing this wasn't as difficult or painful as I thought it would be. Now, I'm lying on a cheap red bed in a rundown hotel that reeks of desperation, the kind of place that gives off heavy bordello vibes. Through the paper-thin walls, I hear a woman screaming furious, her voice cutting through the stale air like a blade. The TV is playing Sincere by Sohn, but it's nowhere near loud enough to drown her out. I find myself thinking about the umbilical cord, the invisible tether that binds us to our families. How it pulls. How it strangles. A friend of mine, the one who convinced me to write all this down, I'll call him Tom, told me a few days ago that I had already started severing that cord. He said I needed to find the strength to cut it completely. The idea hit me hard, and I haven't stopped turning it over in my mind since. I left off in my story when I had finally found friends I could rely on. But instead of continuing my so-called epic rise to power, another memory surfaces. I was at Luis's place. His older brother had just gotten a PC, and he was showing it off. I remember feeling this electric excitement, like his access to a computer meant I had access to. He walked me through all the things it could do, showed me the games he had. I was completely hooked. Eagerly, I asked if I could try it out. That's when his whole demeanor shifted. He glanced at his watch, almost too deliberately. Oh, sorry, man. My brother's coming back from college soon. We gotta go. That was another weird thing about Luis. He always avoided bringing me home when his family was around, like he was hiding me. I had always assumed he did it because he'd get beaten if he brought friends home, and I never questioned it. But this time, it felt off. Too convenient. Too rehearsed. For a moment, I wondered if he just didn't want me there. If maybe, deep down, he was embarrassed to be seen with me. But in the end, I shrugged it off. He had no obligation not to lie. So, I let it slide. Another memory from Luis's house shaped the course of my life more than I ever expected. One day, I was at his place when I noticed his brother's cassette collection. One album stood out immediately. It was beautiful. Something about it pulled me in. What's that? I asked. Oh, that's Metallica's Best Ballads, Luis said, barely glancing at it. My brother's obsessed. I don't get why. Seems like an okay band. Can I borrow it? I hated asking, but I needed to hear it. The cover alone had me hooked. Yeah, sure. While you're at it, take this too. It's even better. He tossed me another cassette, In Utero by Nirvana. I pocketed both, thanked him, and rushed home. The moment I got through the door, I went straight for the cassette player. I slid in Metallica first. The second the music started, something inside me clicked. It was like hearing a song from a past life. Every note, every riff, it felt like home. Then I put in Utero. Nirvana was different. Darker. It didn't feel like home. It felt like someone had found the itch buried deep inside my heart and started scratching at it with raw, jagged nails. It was unsettling and cathartic. That night changed everything. That's how I started listening to rock music, and from that moment on, I was never the same. I think I have a fever. This bed smells wrong. God knows what kind of filth has seeped into it over the years. I should drink my beer, smoke, and try to forget the fact that I'm lying in something that probably carries a disease.